SK Gaming as an organization in League of Legends could have and probably should at the moment be one of the great EU teams, still in control of the scene, one of the elite level organizations, and putting together teams which have the quality of name value and high level of player skill that even if for some reason they didn't perform, they would be in position to get better players and to return back to the top, as you see with teams like CLG, TSM, Cloud9 over in the North American area. Yet SK Gaming do not exist within this capacity in League of Legends anymore. They're not up there with the Fanatics of the world. They're not around and they're not considered a top level squad anymore. So you have to look at the history of the team and the decisions they made, and it becomes only apparent as to why that is. In fact, when you look at the history of the SK Gaming League of Legends team, they were actually quite fortuitous. Like, as an org, they were quite lucky with some of the results that they got and people who played much better than the value of them as players at the time. And as a result, allowed them actually the modicum of success they had in EU League of Legends, where they didn't necessarily make the investments and make the big power moves, the blockbuster trades to get the top talent that they perhaps should have gotten. So back in Season 1 of League of Legends, SK Gaming had an elite level team, a team that was making it deep in IEMs all the time. They had some very good players. They had Ocelot, who was still a top player back then. They had Snoopy, who was a good jungler. They had Wicked, was probably the best top player in Europe and contending with Hotshot in the West. So they had Snoopy and Wicked. They let those players go. Those guys went off. They went to Absolute Legends. Later became CLG EU. Obviously became much more successful than SK Gaming did in Season 2. But okay, they didn't try hard enough to keep those players. So in they got the guys who'd been on Gamed DE at the Season 1 finals. And that was Kevin, Nif, Candy Panda. In came these guys. And actually that turned out to be quite fortuitous because Gamed DE wasn't some sick team before. They were all right. And in came these guys. And these would end up being a really solid core of SK Gaming for the next 2 years. So Season 2 comes along. The team's having issues because they keep changing the jungler. But they get Aranea in at the right time. Now, Aranea was never going to be a long-term solution. He was never going to be someone who'd be really consistent. But he came in, he played really high level for the summer and going into the Gamescom. Ocelot had a overperformance. He was always a very good LAN player at that time. He held it together on LAN, and they had that big Gamescom upset of CLGU, made it to the final, qualified for Worlds. This was unexpected, actually. People thought that they would be contending with Fnatic for that spot, but in the end, by beating CLGU in this incredible fashion, they managed to go directly to Worlds, and obviously Worlds didn't really work out very well. Season 3 comes along. They get Herkbot as their jungler. It seems to be going all right. They finished 4th in the first LCS season, but actually that belies a little bit more of the story. Sure, their record in the season was good, but first of all, they lost to CLGU in the 3rd place game. Second of all, they never actually played and won a playoff series that year, because in the playoffs, the game would have been against... let me see. It would have been against All Authority. And actually that team had to pull out due to its own roster issues and someone being ill and having to go. Something weird like that. And so they never actually played a season. We never saw them get tested in the playoffs. Summer comes around. Okay, it was going all right for a while. I can see why they'd stick with the roster. It didn't work out. So in that one, you say, fair enough. You had to give it another shot. You know, you had a player that everyone thought was quite good in Herkbot who might be able to transform the team. But by the end of summer, you kind of see the issues that are going on here. Now, here's the problem. Ocelot leaves. He goes off. He forms Gamers 2. So you're in this situation where they end up with a budget roster. People don't seem to realize that. Because the team did well in Season 4, they don't seem to understand that was a budget roster. They spent the minimum and they just got players who weren't wanted or had bad reps, so Svenskeren, etc. Or, like I'm saying, just weren't wanted, N-rated. Freddy122, these players weren't highly touted. Jezis was just a no-name at the time. This should have been a budget roster that would have been competing just to stay out of relegation. People forget the actual roster originally would have been relegated. They were losing in that series against Super Hot Crew until Nif went God mode in the last 3 games and just bodied the whole games and kept them in LCS. Then Nif went off because remember, Nif then went to Alliance. And in came N-rated. Now, remember, people at the time actually moaned about this. They were like, oh, bringing in N-rated. Like, he got kicked out Fnatic. Like, what's he been doing? He's just been a coach for Evil Geniuses after that, and then Lemon Dogs at Worlds. Like, this guy's not going to be good. He ended up being their saving grace. He was the move that actually came in and really brought SK back. Because, yes, Svenskeren and Freddy122 were the better players at the time in the team. But N-rated was the brains. This is a guy who's always had a big strategical impact on his teams, helped with shot calling, and his teams always have a logic of how to play within the meta game of that era. There's a reason why they always improve when he's involved. So this N-rated SK Gaming lineup for Season 4 exceeded expectations by far. Remember, in the regular season of the Spring Split, they won the league. They finished top of the league portion of it. Then, in the actual playoffs, they made it to the final. Remember, Roccat upset Gambit, then played against SK. Roccat was doing pretty well that season. Doesn't matter. SK beat them. They go to the final. Okay, they lose to Fnatic there. Fnatic was a super stacked team in spring of 2014. That was the one where they had Reckless and Yellow Star playing like a godlike bot lane, really high stats. Then they had Xpeke, still very strong. Sawaz was good still. And then obviously, at the time, it was Cyanide still was the jungler. So they make it to the final, they lose. Okay, that's already fine for what you've invested. Summer comes along. Yeah, they're not doing very well in the season, are they? Now it's leveling off to probably where it should be, and now the other teams have improved their rosters. Now they're in a position, so it's not going well in the summer. They then come in, they wreck Millennium in the playoffs, because Millennium was never a playoff team, never good in the playoffs. They almost beat Alliance. They gave Alliance the closest series of the whole playoffs. They could have won that series 3-1 instead of losing it 3-1. Froggen had to hard carry some of those team fights. And remember, he was the best player in Europe, if not the best player in the West at the time, and he still narrowly was able to get them over the hump there. In the third place game, they wrecked Roccat. Roccat had taken Fnatic close 3-2 in the other semi. They just body them 3-0, qualify for Worlds. So in Season 4, with a super budget roster, no star players, in terms of big name value or big cost to get them, they managed to stay in LCS, finish top of the league in the regular season, make the final of the first split, make the semis of the second split, qualify for Worlds. Now, we all know what happened at Worlds with Svenskeren's ban, so they couldn't get out of the group, but they would have even been in position with that lucky group draw that they even could have maybe got out of the group at Worlds if Svenskeren had been available. They would have at least had a shot at it, you know. So I think SK, you can't give the organisation credit for that. I mean, you think someone within the organisation knew that, like, Enrayed's some genius player, and like, I'm going to make a very shrewd pick up, or it's already 1-2-2. No, they're not experts in League of Legends like that. They got lucky in that particular sense, and they got all these results out of it. So yeah, it's not their fault they got fucked at Worlds, but Season 5 comes along, and man alive, think about how lucky this becomes, because they get in Forgiven, who, yeah, is a beast. That's a good pickup, really good pickup there, nice upgrade. They get in Fox, who is a challenger player, but ends up being a good upgrade, and they get a coach. Now, that whole thing, by the way, with the coach apparently was very overrated. The idea that Jensen, then called Incarnation, was like coaching. He told me not really. He used to like help out with some of the matchups for the mid laner, Jesus, and he used to maybe give some comments. That's about it. Well, Fox would have been the mid lane at the time. So they get Forgiven in, and obviously Forgiven, his power play, combined with N-Rated's understanding of the meta, and then Svenskeren's power jungling, they managed to dominate Europe in the regular season. They go 15-3. They have a poor IEM, sure. Remember, one of the losses was against GE Tigers, who at the time was considered the best team in the world. And it was thanks to GE Tigers being the first to figure out how to do the 2-bat AD carry ban and then pick a player against Forgiven and force him onto one that he wasn't as strong on. They then come to the playoffs of ULCS. They lose in the semi-final 3-2. They lose in third place 3-2. So, okay, this one actually worked out a bit worse than you thought it would. But remember, they still haven't got some super sick rosters, mainly Forgiven and then N-Rated's tactical approach that's getting them this far. Summer comes along. They've allowed Forgiven to go. They've literally put the team in the hands of Forgiven. If you want to stay, we'd kick Svenskeren. Like, what kind of mad scenario is this where you're giving players choices to who picks the team? You're just an org. You're supposed to decide what happens there. So whatever, they let Svenskeren effectively kick out Forgiven, the MVP of the league, and they go to shit. Everything that happens in this summer is wrong. They make their sports psychologist their coach. Okay, what the fuck does he know about the game? Doesn't work out. He's just a psychologist. That bombs. The dentist logs got leaked from Copenhagen Wolves, which showed that actually SK was not willing to pay top salaries, despite the fact they just had a team that might have won LCS before. Not willing to pay top salaries, so they can't get top players. That's why people were looking to get players instead. They didn't do enough to go after the likes of Freeze and Reckless, who should have been available, remember? Reckless had been off on elements that had done really badly. Freeze was stuck in Copenhagen Wolves and had offers and had talks with SK, but they didn't try hard enough. They didn't really go after him. They didn't offer him a lot of money. They didn't try to make him happy. And he, at the time, he was one of the star players of the league on a bad team. So if you wanted to get in someone to replace Forgiven, he was the ideal option. They didn't do it back then. Instead, they got old Candy Panda back, who's already just been a decent player, but now, in this modern era of really strong EU AD carries, couldn't live up to the hype. Couldn't match that level, and you've just replaced the MVP of the league with a guy who's not even top 5 in ELCS. What, and you think you're going to win with that lineup? So they have a terrible run in the summer. It goes to shit. Season 6 isn't even worth talking about. I mean, once they're relegated from ELCS, they're just nothing at that point. They're not relevant whatsoever. So the problems this team has had is that they've actually been very lucky with some of the roster moves they had. They weren't these geniuses that scouted people. They got some people in that actually either by recommendation of players or just happening to get someone who's like got something to prove and is on the downside of their career and turns it around. And they actually have been propped up over the years by the lucky, fortuitous outcomes of some of those moves. They didn't have a proper coaching staff, and then when they finally did get some coaching staff, which was mainly just the sports psychologist, they just promoted him, and then obviously he didn't work out as the head coach. They were always too reluctant to spend big money. Now, this has always been an issue because it's come from the ideology, the philosophy of the owner of SK, of the Slash. Because he's someone where I've talked to him many times about this. In fact, I did an interview when I was at On Games. I'm not sure if it'll still be there. Let me think. Would it be called The Reflections with the Slash? Maybe. It might be on YouTube. And basically, a couple of things he could have done. First of all, he could have gotten some of the best players throughout history. Chose not to because he thought that salary increases were an inflationary bubble and that they would pop a year or two after that, which they didn't, by the way. They've continued to go up. And so he wouldn't invest because he thought wouldn't be worth his money in the years following. Secondly, he also thought that he should stick with Ocelot because Ocelot was a big brand. Therefore, he kept Ocelot for too long as an in-game player and allowed Ocelot to make some of the decisions about who was in the team. That was a problem in itself there. That's what allowed the team to drop down. And then thirdly, when he had a chance to get better teams, he didn't pull the trigger because, again, he didn't think it was worth paying all this money to get a really top-performing team and then have to gamble that they perform well the next season. Why not just stick with what I've got? So, for example, Moscow 5 is arguably the best team in the world still, or one of the best teams in the world, at the end of season 2, so the end of 2012, and he didn't make a bid for them. He let them just go to Gambit, this new org, and continue to be a really good team. Didn't make the big move. And then they've made really poor roster moves. Aside from the ones they got lucky on, the other ones have just been complete ass. Just pretty whack all in all. So you look at the future of SK as a League of Legends org, what future? I mean, there basically is none. This is a team that probably should be in the position they're in now, pretty much dead as a League of Legends org. At the beginning of season 4, they should probably have been relegated. They shouldn't have. In that scenario, they wouldn't have been in the league. What happened was NIF saved them, and then they got lucky with N-rated coming and actually revitalizing the whole squad. I mean, you look at the players. Think about that. They took Jezis as a mid laner, and they got to and Candy Panda at the time again, and they managed to win the regular split. That is incredible. But that's the players right there. That's not the org. So as an org, I think they've done quite a bad job in League of Legends. They haven't really understood. They haven't evolved with the metagame of what you do with how you make a team and how you build around a team and which players you're willing to spend the money on and spending on the coaching staff. And they've done quite a poor job in this particular respect. And so I actually feel like they're the ones that held themselves back. They were in the really good position in season 1, still pretty good position in season 2, and they've let themselves progressively just go downhill so that the later results make them look like they're still a good org, but that's just player performance holding them up. And as soon as the player performance is gone, it collapses in. And everyone in the scene behind the scenes in the industry knew they wouldn't pay top salaries, knew they weren't a big destination for people to go. And that's why even the stars of the latter day, Svenskar and Forgiven, were only troubled stars. People who had a rep that kept them out of other teams or weren't liked by other people due to trash talking, etc. And that's why they had to take their chances on an SK Gaming or an N-rated, again, who had the bad rep and had to revitalize himself there. But this is not what a top org should be. And they had the legacy where they probably should have been a top org.